competitor channel link. The captain said it loud enough for 12 people to hear. "I'm sorry, sir, but people like you don't belong in this cabin." He didn't whisper it. He didn't pull the man aside. He stood in the aisle of the first-class cabin of Horizon Atlantic Flight 114, in full uniform, with his gold wings catching the overhead light, and he said it in front of every passenger who had already boarded. The man he said it to didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't reach for his wallet or his phone or his boarding pass. He simply looked at the captain for a moment, the way a person looks at something they've already figured out, and then he nodded once, slowly, and said, "Of course, Captain. Whatever you need." He picked up his single carry-on bag and walked to the back of the plane. 41 minutes later, that captain would walk off this aircraft for the last time. Not because he was asked to, because the man he had just sent to the back row had built the airline he was standing in. Stay until the end. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story reaches. That morning had started like every other Tuesday for Marcus Webb. He was 53 years old. He had a quiet face, the kind that people rarely remember. He kept his hair cut close, wore reading glasses he had owned for 4 years, and traveled with one bag, a soft-sided black duffel that he had carried on more than 200 flights over the past decade. He never checked luggage. He had learned, a long time ago, that a person who waits at baggage claim is a person who has already given away 30 minutes they will never get back. He woke up at 5:14 that morning in a hotel room in Atlanta, not because he had an alarm set. He had not used an alarm clock in 11 years. His body simply knew. He made coffee in the room, the weak kind that comes in paper cups, and he drank it standing by the window, looking at the city lights still burning through the dark. He had a board call at 2 in the afternoon. He had a dinner in New York that evening with a man named Gerald Fitch, who ran the largest aviation infrastructure fund in the eastern United States. And he had a flight to catch at 8:15. He left the hotel at 6:40. He declined the bellman's offer to take his bag. He sat in the back of the car and did not look at his phone. He watched the highway, the way the city peeled back and became the airport, the way the signs stacked up and then simplified. He found this calming. He always had. He arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson at 7:12. He passed through security in 4 minutes. He bought a bottle of water from a newsstand and paid with cash. He found his gate, B-22, and sat in a chair near the window where he could see the aircraft. It was a wide-body regional jet. Clean, well-maintained, freshly painted in the navy and silver colors of Horizon Atlantic Airlines. His airline, not the way an employee owns something, the way a founder owns something. Marcus Webb had started Horizon Atlantic 17 years ago with a leased turboprop and a route between 2 cities that everyone else had abandoned. He had turned that into a network of 41 routes, 9 hubs, and a fleet of 63 aircraft. He still flew economy most of the time. He liked it. He learned more in the back of the plane than he ever did in a boardroom. But this morning, his assistant had booked him into seat 3A, first class, for a simple reason. The flight was full and there was nothing else. His phone rang at 7:40. He looked at the screen. It was Daniel Osei, his chief of staff. He let it ring. He already knew what Daniel wanted to talk about. The acquisition offer from a private equity group that had been on the table for 6 weeks. 44 pages of term sheets. Marcus had read them all. He would call Daniel back from New York. There was nothing that needed to be decided in an airport terminal at 7:40 in the morning. He watched a ground crew worker load bags into the aircraft's belly. The worker was moving fast, efficient, no wasted motion. Marcus noted this. He noted everything. At 7:50, they began boarding. The first-class cabin of Horizon Atlantic Flight 114 had 16 seats. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Priya Chadha, had been with the airline for 9 years. She ran a quiet, tight cabin. She remembered names from the boarding pass. She poured drinks before passengers asked, and she had never once received a complaint in 9 years of service. Her colleagues respected her. Her supervisors used her as the example in training videos. She was standing at the forward galley when Captain Robert Stroud boarded. Captain Stroud was 61 years old. He had been flying for Horizon Atlantic for 7 years, after transfers from 2 other regional carriers. He had an impeccable safety record. He knew the aircraft systems the way some people know the layout of their own house, without thinking, without doubt. He was a technically excellent pilot. He was also a man who had very clear ideas about how the world was organized, about who belonged where, about what a first-class passenger looked like, sounded like, arrived like. He greeted Priya at the galley door and reviewed the passenger manifest for the flight. He checked the fuel log. He spoke briefly with his first officer, a younger man named Chen Wei, about the weather system they would skirt over Tennessee. He did all of this correctly, professionally, without error. When he came out of the cockpit 11 minutes later to speak with the gate agent about a catering issue, he passed through the boarding first-class cabin. He saw most of the seats filling with the passengers he expected to see. Suits, laptop bags, the particular kind of exhausted confidence that belongs to frequent business travelers, and then he saw seat 3A. Marcus Webb was sitting with his duffel bag tucked under the seat in front of him, his reading glasses on, a printed copy of a financial document open in his lap. He was wearing a navy pullover and dark slacks. His shoes were clean but not new. He looked, to Captain Stroud's eye, like someone who had taken a wrong turn. Stroud stopped. He looked at the boarding pass in the system on the attendant screen. He looked at Marcus again. He made a decision in less time than it takes to draw a breath. He walked to seat 3A. "Excuse me, sir." Marcus looked up from his document. He folded his glasses and looked at the captain standing over him. He had seen men like this before. He had worked with men like this before. He could read the situation in about 3 seconds. "Yes, Captain, I'm going to need to see your boarding pass." "Of course." Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and handed it over. Stroud looked at it. He looked at it longer than necessary. Then he handed it back. "There may have been a mistake at check-in," he said. His voice was professional, controlled, but it carried something underneath, an assumption he hadn't examined and wouldn't. "This is the premium first-class cabin. Seat 3A is one of our full-fare seats." "I know," Marcus said. "I'm in 3A." Stroud's jaw tightened slightly. Around them, 3 other passengers had stopped moving. A woman in 2B had looked up from her phone. A man across the aisle was watching from the edge of his vision while pretending not to. "Sir, I don't want to make this uncomfortable, but people like you," Stroud paused, just long enough to pretend the pause was professional, "don't usually book this cabin directly. Is it possible this was a points upgrade that came through incorrectly? We can have you sorted in economy and make sure you're comfortable." "People like you." Priya Chadha heard it from the galley. She went very still. Marcus looked at the captain, not with anger, with something quieter and more complete than anger. He took off his reading glasses, folded them, and placed them in his chest pocket. "Captain," he said, his voice even and unhurried, "my name is Marcus Webb. I am in seat 3A. That is a confirmed full-fare first-class booking made by my office." "I understand what you're saying," Stroud replied, "but the comfort of all our first-class passengers is my responsibility. I'm going to have to ask you to gather your things and move to the economy cabin. We'll have Priya get you settled." Pause. The woman in 2B looked away quickly. The man across the aisle shifted in his seat. No one said a word. Marcus looked at the captain for 4 seconds. Then he picked up his duffel bag, tucked his document under his arm, stood up, and said, "Whatever you need." He walked past 4 rows of first-class seats. He walked past the curtain. He found an open middle seat in row 22, between a teenager with headphones and an older woman reading a paperback. He put his duffel in the overhead bin, sat down, and opened his document again. He did not look back toward the front of the plane. He pulled out his phone, opened a contact he had not called in 3 months, and typed a single message. "Are you in the office?" The reply came in 40 seconds. "Always. What do you need?" Marcus typed back, "Pull the personnel file for the lead captain on HA Flight 114 Atlanta to New York this morning, and get me Horizon's head of operations on the phone in 10 minutes. He put the phone face down on his tray table and went back to his document. 37,000 feet below where they would soon be flying, a very different conversation was about to begin. On the 14th floor of a glass building in Midtown Manhattan, the offices of Horizon Atlantic's corporate headquarters were already running at full speed by 8 in the morning. The head of operations, a sharp-minded woman named Sandra Cole, had been at her desk since 7. She had 3 monitors, a standing desk she never actually stood at, and a reputation for being the person at Horizon who solved problems before they became problems. She had worked alongside Marcus Webb for 11 years. She was one of 6 people in the world who had his direct number. At 8:04, her phone rang. The name on the screen made her pick up on the first ring. "Marcus, I thought you were en route to New York." "I am." His voice was calm, perfectly calm. "I need you to pull up the full record for Captain Robert Stroud. Flight 11 Atlanta to JFK this morning." Sandra's fingers were already moving. "Stroud, Robert, 7 years with us. Prior service with Meridian Regional and Skylink. Safety record is clean, she paused. Is something wrong? He just removed me from first class. Silence. Not the kind of silence that comes from surprise. The kind that comes from understanding exactly what those 6 words mean. He removed you from? Sandra stopped. Marcus. He told me, and I'm using his exact words, that people like me don't usually book that cabin. The pen in Sandra's hand stopped moving against her notepad. She had worked in aviation for 19 years. She had heard stories. She had filed reports. She had sat in diversity training sessions and compliance meetings and exit interviews. But there was something about hearing these words in her employer's voice. In the voice of the man who had built this airline from a single, leased aircraft that landed differently than any of those sessions ever had. He said that. He did, in front of at least 4 other passengers. Where are you now? Row 22, middle seat. Another silence, then quietly, I'll make some calls. I know you will, Marcus said, but I want this done right. Pull everything. I want the full picture by the time I land. He ended the call. He folded his hands on the tray table. The teenager next to him had fallen asleep. The older woman with the paperback had reached the end of a chapter and was looking for the bookmark she had lost somewhere in her bag. Marcus put his reading glasses back on and returned to his financial documents, while Captain Stroud was in the cockpit at 31,000 feet. Confident the situation had been handled correctly, Sandra Cole was on her second call, then her third. She was pulling 4 years of passenger complaint records, cross-referencing against Stroud's flight logs, and finding things that no individual complaint had ever made visible on its own. 14 incidents in which economy passengers had been moved into premium cabins at Stroud's direction, always the same profile, always the same explanation, logged as a seating error. 3 formal complaints from first-class passengers who had been asked to show documentation that no other passenger was asked to produce. A pattern, clear, documented, and now attached to the name of the man whose paycheck Marcus Webb had personally approved for 7 consecutive years. She had the full report ready 8 minutes before the flight landed. Flight 11 touched down at JFK at 10:47. Marcus waited. He let the plane empty from the front. He was in no hurry. When the economy cabin had cleared enough that the aisle was open, he stood up, retrieved his duffel bag, and walked forward. Priya was standing near the forward galley, collecting blankets. When she saw him walking up the aisle, she straightened. She looked like a person who had spent the last 2 hours deciding what to say and still hadn't found it. Mr. Webb, she said quietly. He stopped. I tried to say something when it happened, she said. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not. I should have been louder about it. I'm sorry I wasn't. Marcus looked at her. What's your name, Priya Chadha? 9 years. She blinked. Yes. How did you? I read the company profiles when we bring someone through the leadership track, he said. Your name was on the list 2 years ago. You had a perfect service record then. He paused. I assume it's still perfect. Priya didn't answer. She was trying to process the conversation she was currently having. It is, Marcus said, answering his own question. I'll be in touch. He nodded once and walked off the aircraft. In the jet bridge, he turned on his phone. 17 notifications. He scrolled through them quickly. Sandra had sent a summary document. His assistant had confirmed the afternoon board call. Daniel Osei had called 3 times. He called Sandra first. I have everything, she said without preamble. 14 incidents going back to 2021. 3 formal complaints, all marked as resolved, all resolved by Stroud's supervisor at the time, who is no longer with the company. The pattern is clear. Send it to legal and to HR, Marcus said. I want 2 separate reviews, independent of each other, and I want the findings on my desk before end of business Thursday. Done. Do you want to speak with Stroud directly? No, that's not my conversation to have. He paused. It's HR's conversation. I'm not involved in the disciplinary process. Understood. He was walking through the terminal now, past the gate agents and the coffee carts and the families with rolling luggage. He walked the way he always walked, without urgency, without announcement, at a pace that covered ground, without appearing to rush. At baggage claim level, a car was waiting. His driver, a quiet man named Earl, who had been with him for 6 years, had the door open before Marcus reached it. Good flight, Earl asked. Informative, Marcus said. He got in the car and called Daniel. By noon, 3 things had happened that Captain Robert Stroud knew nothing about. First, Sandra Cole had placed the personnel review formally on record with Horizon Atlantic's legal department, flagging it as a discrimination matter under Federal Aviation Passenger Rights Guidelines. Second, The airline's head of HR had opened a formal investigation, which meant that Stroud's access to the scheduling system would be reviewed, and that his next flight assignment, a morning departure to Chicago on Thursday, had been quietly flagged pending investigation completion. Third, a woman named Gloria Tate, who ran the Horizon Atlantic Board's Oversight Committee and who had known Marcus Webb for 14 years, had received a brief factual email from Marcus. No anger in it, no editorial, just the facts in the order they happened, with the timestamps attached. Gloria read it twice, then she forwarded it to 2 board members with a single line. "We need to talk before Thursday." By 2 in the afternoon, Marcus was on his board call. He spoke for 47 minutes about the airline's Eastern Corridor expansion, the fuel hedging strategy for the following quarter, and a proposed partnership with a European carrier that would add 6 transatlantic routes by the end of the year. He did not mention the morning's flight. He did not bring it up at any point during the call. The call ended at 2:51. At 3:08, Robert Stroud landed Flight 11V back from New York on a return positioning leg. He taxied to the gate. He completed his post-flight checklist. He signed off his log. He was thinking about dinner. He was thinking about the fact that the weather on Thursday looked clean all the way to Chicago. He walked through the crew door into the terminal. His phone showed a message from the HR department, a request to meet in the Atlanta operations office at 9 the following morning. Described as a routine inquiry, he assumed it was about a scheduling conflict. He texted back, "I'll be there." The meeting the next morning lasted 1 hour and 40 minutes. There were 3 people in the room: the head of HR, a legal representative, and a compliance officer who specialized in discrimination cases. They had the 14 incidents. They had the complaint records. They had a flight attendant's written account. Priya Chadha had submitted a formal statement the previous evening, at her own initiative, before anyone had asked her to. And they had the testimony of 4 first-class passengers from Flight 114 who had already responded to a survey sent automatically by the airline's feedback system. 3 of them mentioned the incident directly. One of them had written 4 paragraphs. Stroud sat across the table and listened. He tried in the first 20 minutes to explain. He talked about customer comfort. He talked about his experience reading cabins. He talked about how sometimes upgrades come through the system with errors. He talked about Horizon's commitment to all passengers having the right seat. The HR director let him finish. Then she placed Sandra Cole's summary document on the table. Stroud looked at it. He read the first page. His face changed the way a person's face changes when they understand. Not what they did wrong, but the size of what they did wrong. "Who submitted this?" he asked. "The review was initiated by corporate," the HR director said. She was careful with her words. She did not use Marcus's name. That was not her role. "The review is based on documented incidents and witness accounts." Stroud sat back. He looked at the ceiling. He was 61 years old. He had 7 years with this airline. He had a pension. He had a flight on Thursday morning that he was no longer going to take. "The passenger in seat 3A, he said, finally. "Who was he?" There was a brief pause. "His name is Marcus Webb," the HR director said. Stroud went very still. Even he knew that name. Everyone in aviation knew that name. Stroud started. "The founder and majority shareholder of Horizon Atlantic Airlines," the compliance officer said. Yes, the room was quiet for a moment. Not a dramatic quiet. Not the kind in movies. Just the ordinary, heavy quiet of a man understanding the full weight of a decision he made in 3 seconds 36 hours ago. "I didn't know who he was," Stroud said. His voice had lost everything it usually carried. "That's the point," the HR director said, not unkindly. "It wouldn't have been appropriate regardless." The conversation that followed was brief and professional. Robert Stroud's employment with Horizon Atlantic was terminated effective immediately on the grounds of repeated discriminatory conduct toward passengers and violation of federal anti-discrimination policies governing air carriers. He would receive the severance package outlined in his contract. His aviation license remained valid. That was not within the airline's authority to affect, but the termination record would be available to any future employer who contacted Horizon's HR department. He was given a form to sign and a box for the items in his locker. He signed the form. He walked out of the building at 10:52 in the morning. The sky over Atlanta was clear. There was no turbulence. The weather on the route to Chicago was still perfect. He did not get to fly it. Marcus Webb was in New York when Sandra called to confirm the outcome. He was standing at the window of his office on the 31st floor, looking at the East River. He had a coffee, a real one this time, not from a paper cup, and he had already moved on to 3 other problems that needed his attention that day. The review is complete, Sandra said. Termination effective this morning. Okay. There were 14 incidents. Marcus. He had been doing this for years. I know. He paused. What about the complaints that were marked resolved by the old supervisor? Legal is reviewing those. If any of those passengers can be identified and reached, we'll be in touch with them. Sandra took a breath. This would have gone on longer if you hadn't been in that seat. Marcus looked at the river. A barge was moving slowly under the bridge, loaded with something he couldn't identify from 31 floors up. No, he said. It would have gone on longer if Priya hadn't filed that statement. He meant it. Priya had written 2 pages. She named the date, the time, the words she heard, and her own failure, as she described it, to intervene more forcefully. She offered it without being asked. She had submitted it at 11:14 the previous night, which meant she had gone home and written it instead of sleeping. What happens to her? Sandra asked. I'd like her reassigned to our training program, Marcus said. Cabin crew standards. She'd be good at it. Ask her first. It has to be something she wants. I'll reach out tomorrow. He nodded, though Sandra couldn't see it. Thank you, Sandra. Good work. He ended the call. He stood at the window a little longer. He thought about the moment on the plane, about picking up his bag, about saying whatever you need to a man who had operated on an assumption without examining it for 1 second. He had walked to row 22, and he had sat in the middle seat, and he had felt the thing he always felt in those moments. A particular, quiet anger, and then he had let it do what he had learned to let it do, work not loudly, not visibly, quietly in the background, finding the right channel, doing the thing the right way, through the right people, with the evidence and the documentation and the process that makes outcomes stick. The loudest person in a room is almost never the most important one. He had believed that for a long time. He believed it still. He put down his coffee, picked up his phone, and called Gerald Fitch about dinner. 3 weeks later, in a conference room on the 14th floor of Horizon Atlantic's headquarters, Marcus Webb stood in front of 17 members of the airline's senior operations team. He was not there to talk about what happened on Flight 114. He did not mention it. He was there to present a new initiative, the Horizon Passenger Standards Program, which he had been quietly building for the previous 11 months with Sandra Cole and a team of behavioral consultants. It was a mandatory certification process. Every crew member, every captain, every gate agent, every person whose job put them in contact with passengers would complete it. Not once, every 2 years. It covered implicit bias. It covered authority and accountability. It covered what it means to represent a company in public. It covered what to do when you witness something wrong and what it costs, to the passenger, to the company, to yourself, when you say nothing. Priya Chadha had helped design one of the modules. She had started her new role in the training division the previous Monday. She had sent Marcus a 2-line email when she accepted the offer. He had read it twice. The program would roll out across all 63 aircraft and 9 hubs beginning the first of the following month. It was not mentioned in any press release. There was no announcement. It was simply part of how Horizon Atlantic would now operate. After the presentation, a junior analyst, she had been with the company for 4 months and had not yet learned to be afraid to ask questions, raised her hand. Mr. Webb, she said, was there a specific incident that prompted this program? The room was quiet. The senior people in the room knew. The junior people didn't. Marcus looked at her for a moment. There were 14 specific incidents, he said, and probably more we don't know about yet. He closed his folder. That's the problem with things that go unchallenged, he said. They don't stay small. He thanked the room, gathered his notes, and left. He had a flight to catch. He was in row 22, middle seat, because the first-class cabin was full. He had booked the last available seat. He always booked whatever was left. When he flew without his assistant scheduling ahead, he sat down between a college student playing a game on his phone and a middle-aged man who had already fallen asleep before takeoff. Marcus put on his reading glasses and opened a new document. He had built an airline in a middle seat. He could run it from one too. If this story reached you, hit that like button. It helps more than you know. Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And subscribe, because the next story is already waiting above the clouds.